Well, it's 9 o'clock. Good morning to you all. Happy Easter. Glad everyone could be here today. Any visitors, we're glad to have you with us. Stick around so we can get to meet you after services. That would be wonderful. My name's Alan Reed. I'm teaching the adult Bible class this week. Next week, I think Wes Arnold's teaching. That's possible. And then the week after that, I think we're having a guest speaker. Roman Halamisic is going to be here and update us on the work in Slovakia. That'll happen during Bible class time. So that's kind of the next few weeks schedule for this. Today we're continuing on in Ecclesiastes, and I'm going to continue this thing where I'm actually taking questions. I know I'm usually known as someone who lectures a lot. And I tried taking questions last week. I got to say that went okay. So we're going to try that again, and a little more interactive and dialogue. And so I'm looking forward to that. And today's lesson, we're going to focus on control. This is the idea that we try to control things without relying on God. And if there was ever a lesson that was directed at me, this is definitely it. I've always had issues with control. You know, now that I'm retired, I like to say I don't have issues with control, but I think I'm just kidding myself. I just refocused what I'm trying to control. There's this famous saying, "Let go, let God have it. Turn things over to God. Let things go. Let God manage them." But that's easier said than done. I struggle with this mightily, so this was just a great lesson for me to focus on. And hopefully you'll be blessed by it as well. For us, Ecclesiastes is full of advice for how to deal with trying to control things that you really shouldn't be trying to control. Trying to understand the issues of control in humanity, I think we have to look at wisdom. The author of this book spent a lot of time focused on human wisdom versus godly wisdom. I'll spend some more time on that in a bit. But we are going to focus on wisdom and recognizing godly wisdom from any other kind of wisdom. And so the first verse that we're going to look at today is found in James 3 and verse 17. Talking about godly wisdom and identifying godly wisdom. One of the things I struggled with while preparing this lesson was, what's godly wisdom versus human wisdom? Or is there anything but godly wisdom? I'm a little clear on that. I'm not totally clear, but I think it's something to think about. So James 3:17 says, "But the wisdom from above is pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere." So when trying to figure out what godly wisdom is, this is an excellent verse to kind of test it against, right? Is this something from God or not? So this gives you some of the attributes of it. It's pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason. That's a big one there, open to reason. Full of mercy and good. So that helped me identify what I think godly wisdom is, and it can be used as a test. And then we talk about what is wisdom of the world. And if we look in 1 Corinthians 1:18 through 25, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has God not made the foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God, but through wisdom it pleased God, through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom. But we preach God crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and a folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." So the book I was talking about that we're using here is called Seeking a Life That Counts. And I really like the book, but this is one area where I struggled with what the author was talking about. He spends a lot of time focusing on human wisdom. And I think he gets a little bit awash in the morass of which is godly wisdom and human wisdom, and spending too much time maybe even kind of defining that. in the end, this guy values human wisdom probably more than I do, or he delineates it in a way where he can categorize it as human wisdom. But as I looked at his definition of human wisdom, it sure looked like, anything good. It looked like the definition we saw in James of actually godly wisdom. So I don't think he drove a lot of clarity here, but he got me to thinking, which maybe that's what he wanted anyway. He implies that there is some value in relying on human wisdom. So I wanted to explore that a little bit. Is that possible for us to rely on human wisdom, and what does it do for us? The problem with it is, I think elevating human wisdom to godly wisdom puts us in the situation of having to make a decision of discerning, and I don't think it's that complicated. I think it's just focusing on godly wisdom. And then we should always focus on godly wisdom in everything that we do. And you say, well, where do we find godly wisdom? Well, we find it in the Scriptures. Right? Ecclesiastes is a good place to look. There's plenty of examples in the Bible where we find godly wisdom. We can pray for wisdom. We can ask God for wisdom. There's a famous Bible character that asked God for wisdom. Solomon, we can ask for wisdom as well. So seeking godly wisdom is really should be our most important task or objective when trying to find out how to do things or manage our lives better, basically seeking wisdom. So where do people get what we would call human wisdom? So there's plenty of people that are not what we would say religious, that don't follow God, or maybe they follow a different religion, or maybe they're agnostic, or maybe they're atheists, and yet they have some level of wisdom. And so if you look at it this way, maybe this author's not too crazy. Maybe there is some element of wisdom that you can get outside of God. But where do these people get their wisdom? Well, that you're brought up, your parents teach you some things, and eventually, it might sink in. You might have some level of wisdom from your parents. So other humans, we get wisdom for other humans. And is there ever a point where we should stop seeking advice or wisdom for other humans? No, I don't know when that is. I'm certainly not there, so maybe some of you are there and tell me what it's like, but I don't know what that's like. I think we all still seek wisdom from others, especially in areas we're not familiar with, in very difficult situations. We ask for advice, ask for perspective. Input from other people is incredibly valuable. What about self-help books? Are those a good place for wisdom? Self-help books? Anybody ever read one of those? They're all over the place. I'll never forget when I saw Joel Osteen in a bookstore in Taipei, and at some level it made me sad that he had books there, but they were translated into Chinese. But these things are everywhere. Why are people looking? I mean, the self-help book well, you don't see bookstores very often, but I guess if you did, it would be a big section of the bookstore. It used to be a big section of the bookstore. There's a lot of them out there, right? And can you get wisdom from these books? Sometimes, right? They can give you some good advice, maybe about financial things, maybe good advice about relationships, but relying on them, right, as our source, and making that how we live our life without focusing on godly wisdom. You can go to seminars and gain wisdom. There's all kinds of people having seminars and lectureships, and that even happens within the church. That thing we did in South Africa, that event we had, was called a lectureship, and so it was a time of learning about leadership, supposedly. So there was people there seeking wisdom, and we do that, right? We go to different seminars, especially maybe in our profession, right? You try to learn more about what you do for a living and new ideas, and so that's another way. Universities, right? We're all shaped by universities, and it's a pliable time of our lives, and we go to a university, and my first few semesters at a state university was a real eye-opener. I didn't even know this kind of stuff existed, but it was an education for me. And then we gain wisdom on the job, right? You talk about an experienced worker, somebody that has a lot of years. They can do a specific task. And so experience counts, and seeing things and knowing things. I will say the other side of this was I had done towards the end of my career, you think you've seen everything. You become kind of jaded and cynical. It's like, well, we tried that once back in the day, it's probably not going to work, and it's a bad feeling to be that way. But we do gain a lot of experience on the job. What I determined out of that, there's definitely a time to leave. So we do get wisdom. Have you ever gotten wisdom from somebody who is not a member of the church? Okay. Have you gotten wisdom from somebody that was not a Christian? I have. And so maybe this helps us kind of dig into this thought about godly wisdom versus human wisdom. But I think there's a test. I think we can get godly wisdom really from many sources. We may not necessarily, it may be an indirect path to us through somebody else, but we can always apply this test to it. People who do not follow God do seem to make wise decisions sometimes. So maybe there is some inherent idea to this human wisdom. But I think about morality a lot, and I always wonder, if I was somebody who did not believe in God, where would my moral compass come from, right? Where would I get the idea that it's okay, it's not okay to murder someone, or it's not okay to steal from someone? Where do these ideas of morality come from? Any idea? Law of the land, but where does that come from? Are we just born with this idea we shouldn't kill other people or steal their stuff? Okay, it comes from God, right? It's this idea of morality that comes from God that's somewhat inherent to our being. At least most people, we hope so, that they don't end up this way. So there's a level of morality even to people who don't claim to be followers of any God. There's some things that are discerned as right and wrong. And I always wonder, where does that come from? But I think if you pull back the covers, it ends up being, comes from God. I mean, it comes from God. That's where we get our morality. That's where it comes from the very beginning. Clearly, some decisions are better than others. I think all good decisions, I would say all good decisions can be traced back to godly wisdom. Again, circling back around to this kind of long discussion it's always best to seek godly wisdom in everything that we do. All right, we seek what God would do, whether that's through reading about it in Scripture or praying about it or getting help from somebody else. We should always seek godly wisdom. Okay, so that was the introduction. So now we're going to move into the value of wisdom. Wisdom can give us success in the world. Achieving work-life balance doesn't mean we're slackers at work. I talked about work-life balance last week, and it's kind of a tired term. Kind of makes me a little weary even mentioning it. But, how am I going to get work-life balance? This is always a struggle. But it is, when we think about work-life balance and how we're going to do this, we can't just blow off work, right? You could say, well, I'll achieve work. I'll show them work-life balance. I'll just be a slacker at work. Is that what God calls us to do? I mean, it's an approach. You can take that approach. Is that a godly approach? No. And that's what makes it hard, right? We're called to be an exemplary employee as well as balancing time with our family. So that's the nut. That makes it really hard. That's hard to undo that and hard to make that happen. The Christian's dedication to his job should be an element that sets us apart, right? I've mentioned this so many times that we should be known as Christians at work. Well, part of that means is you don't do shady things, right? You don't do things that are unethical at your work. And are you ever going to be faced with that at your employment? If you haven't, you will be. And it's an interesting time, especially when your boss is telling you to do something which is unethical, and you're looking at yourself going, I know this is wrong, but my boss told me to do it, but does that make it right? No. I'm probably told this story when I first started working. I may have been an intern. My boss told me to order something, and I said, well, I got to get a purchase order number. He goes, just use an old purchase order number. And so I did. And the controller called me. And he wasn't very happy because I had just, ordered something on a dead purchase order. But my boss, I hear my pitiful words over the phone today. But, Mr. So-and-so told me to do it. He didn't care. He just didn't care. So, fortunately, that wasn't a big deal, and I learned a lot that my integrity and my moral compass is more important than some random boss at some job somewhere, and I need to make sure that we always follow that. Yes, there's risks in doing that. Yes, you can lose your job. And growing up, one of my youth ministers, he was a part-time youth minister, and he lost a job at an air conditioning company because he would not do something, and he held up his ethics, right? He would not do something wrong. And I remember that, and what an impact it made on me. It's just, he had to he just like, well, I don't have a job now because I wouldn't do this. And he had to go find another job. He did, and everything was okay, but the impact he had on some of us in the youth group, that he was willing to make that stand, was immeasurable. I'm still talking about it today, 50 years later. So I just thought that it was very, very impressive how he held on to his ethics. In Ecclesiastes 9:10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge in wisdom of Sheol, to which you are going. Sheol is this grave, or the place where the dead. There's this idea, or Latin term, so carpe diem, which means seize the day. We're given this day. We need to make the most of the day, right? We need to be the employee that works hard. We need to be the person that stands out because they do what they're told. They're not slackers. They don't. You don't see them not working or trying to take advantage of the company. You set an example as a Christian. So make the most of the day God has given us. Even though we're promised an eternal life, God does not want us sitting around until we die, right? That's kind of the whole monk idea, right? Well, I got to separate myself, and I don't want to get in trouble, so I won't do anything, and I won't be influenced by the world. That's not what we're called to do. It's not what Jesus did. We have to build our faith. We have to be out and amongst the world. We have to answer the call of the Great Commission, and we can't do that by sitting around not doing anything. In Ephesians 5:15 and 16, we're told to approach life with vision and vitality. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time because the days are evil. I had this idea that this sounds pretty basic, but Christians should be happy, right? In general, shouldn't we be happy? And shouldn't that be something that we echo out in the world, that we're generally happy? Is that going to make somebody want to come to church if you're just a miserable louse and you're always complaining and whining and you're just never happy? You never have a smile on your face or talk about anything good. So Christians are generally, we're tasked to be happy people, and that helps us stand out. Vision and vitality, go after our day, knowing that we are Christians, knowing that they're children of God, knowing that we're saved, but we're going to make the most of this day. We're going to be positive, and we're going to influence people the best way that we know how. So we need to stand out that way as Christians. So the next one is wisdom can preserve and protect our lives. Ecclesiastes 7:12. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. God gives us brains to use. I think that's part of, you say, well, I'm waiting on God to do something. Well, he gave you a brain, right? You need to apply it at some level to the problem in front of you. It's not necessarily taking control away from God. It's just using what we've been given. Part of God's solution to our problem is using our minds to solve the problem, right? It's not waiting for some miracle from above or some miraculous thing to change. It puts an onus on us to figure it out. So wisdom can also protect us too. It's a common sense, right? If you touch the stove, you get burned, right? And the list goes on and on and on to, adult mistakes, which I make all the time. If you climb the ladder, you're going to fall someday. So there's wisdom in things like that. And maybe I shouldn't do that, or I need to get somebody else, or I'm going to call Emmett to help me here because this is not going well. For those of you who don't know, Emmett is very helpful, especially when ladders are involved. Wisdom can also give us resolve. One of my favorite characters in history is Winston Churchill. He had this saying, it said, never, never, never. I like that there's 3 nevers, by the way. never give up, right? And he said this in the darkest hours of World War II in October 1941 when England was all by itself. The United States had not entered the war yet, and they were being bombed, and France had fallen, and it was a dire time. So the resolve was really all they had left, and they were just never going to give up. And I recall this idea, and I think we see this in the Bible as well. When I think about Paul, I think that same idea applies to him and some of the sufferings that he went through in prison and things like that. He just never gave up, and so I think that's very inspiring. Wisdom is better than brute strength. At times, negotiation can solve things that fighting and wars cannot. And I think that's always the preferred way of resolving an issue, right? I don't know did you used to get in fight? Maybe some of the guys did fights when you were in school. People still do that. I don't even know if that's appropriate. It's just something we did. I didn't get in too many, but I got in a few fights. My mother's in here. She's finding out new things probably. But after fighting somebody, you realize you have this idea that it's probably better to have just talked about that rather than whatever we just did, and so we see that in a global scale as well, where people are. You hope that negotiations will end something before some kind of conflict breaks out. In Ecclesiastes 9:13-18. I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one can remember that poor man, but I say that the wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words not heard. The words of the wise heard in the quiet are better than showing of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. All right, so we talked about this. Using our words is always better than physical altercation. Sometimes we have to get into physical altercation to be reminded of that, but it's always true. And it also, wisdom applies to choosing our words correctly, right? Choosing our words correctly. When you're discussing something or negotiating or trying to apply diplomacy, choosing words wisely is very important. Understanding of the position the person's in that you're talking with, understanding their culture and what they want out of the situation are great tools to help you resolve some sort of conflict.
Real quick on that.
Yes.
How do you say those words?
Yes.
Say the right words, but you say them in an angry way or
Yep.
an incorrect way, you can really start an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And a part of that's understanding the culture where the person's coming from. Now, if it's somebody around here, it's pretty easier, but in a global sense, you have to be aware of where people are coming from. That's a really good point, and the way you say things is really important. Wisdom makes our labor fruitful. Wisdom can help us build a worldly legacy. Are there rich people in the world? I hear there are. You hear about these people, they're just really crazy rich, right? They have an incredible amount of money. And I know I've said this before, but we're all rich in a way. We've all created our own legacy, right? We all have our own, I hate to say the word portfolio, or we have what we have accumulated on the earth, right? It's a house, maybe a little bit of money, a car, we all have some stuff. And wisdom helped bring that to pass, right? We got a job, we've had some level of success in our job, or we started a company and it went well, we've made some money and we've established ourselves. Some people earn lots of money and have lots of wealth, and so it becomes something that we chase as humans. But sometimes the benefactors of this legacy are fools, and I didn't make that up. That's said in Ecclesiastes. If we look at 2:20 and 21. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This is also vanity and a great evil. You ever notice it like some great company, the founder's children take over? What happens a lot of times? bad stuff happens, right? It's not, because some person did a great thing and maybe started a good company, that has no bearing on what his children are going to do. Their only claim to fame is that they were born. They didn't do anything. So that happens a lot of times. A lot of times, what happens when you leave somebody? A lot of times when you leave somebody, or somebody quickly comes into a lot of money. You see it with lottery winners. Maybe you see it with somebody's inherited something from Uncle Joe or whatever. What usually happens to that? It's squandered is a word. It's amazing to me. I read about some of these athletes sometimes that are broke, right? And they were paid tens of millions of dollars to sign something somewhere to do something, and I'm like, how could they lose that much money in that short amount of time? But guess what? It's easy to do. It's a piece of cake. You can go down to in debt in no time at all. I don't care how much money you have. The wisdom here is, what do you do, right? What do you do? I'm not going to get into estate planning here, but unless you want to. No, I'm not going to. I'm not qualified for that. So, but you think about where I'm going to leave all this money to my errant child, right? I'm going to leave all this. We need to be aware of that and what we're doing and what we're creating there, and the environment is that child or that person you're leaving the money to equipped to do anything reasonable with that money besides lose it. And so it's just something that as rich Americans, which we all are, we have to always think about. And we get that advice here from Ecclesiastes, from the preacher, about how we should do this. And people are people. If they suddenly come into money and they don't have a plan, odds are they're going to blow it on things they shouldn't be buying. And while you might say, well, does that really matter? But we are called to be stewards, and you think about what else could you have done with that, right? Or what else could have happened with that lottery money from a charity perspective, from the work of the Lord. There's all kinds of different ways where the money could have been spent better than just. It's kind of like the rich young ruler that squandered his inheritance, right? We have to be aware of that. Wisdom helps us evaluate life's experience. A wise person can see trouble ahead, right? I remember when I took driving. What do you call it? Instruction for driving. What do you call it? Driver's education. Yes. It's been a long time. But I remember for some reason coaches taught that, and they weren't. I don't mean to be negative on coaches here, but these guys weren't very engaged. We drove to San Antonio one time just to get miles, and there were two coaches in the car, and they were asleep really the whole time I was driving. I was kind of wondering about all that. But one thing one of them told me was, play the what-if game. And I had my pilot's license one time, and the instructor pilot would always tell me that too. Play the what-if game. What if this? What if that? It's kind of depressing, but what if my engine failed? Who wants to think about that all the time? But it does make you more aware, right? What if that car veers into my lane, or that guy's tire's wobbling? What if it falls off? So you get yourself out of situations, ahead of time. And so that's kind of the idea here. And so in Ecclesiastes in 9:11 through 12, we see, again, I saw under the sun a race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor the bread to the wise, nor the riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge. But time and chance can happen to them all. But man does not know his time. Like fish that are taken in an evil net, and birds that are caught in a snare, so children of man are snared at the evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. So time and chance can take tolls on our wisdom. And this is maybe one of the things that separates human wisdom from godly wisdom. Despite our best efforts to control situations, how does it usually work out if we don't include God and we try to manage things ourselves? It can be difficult, right? Maybe you'll get through it, but you're going to, emotionally, you're going to be a wreck. You're going to be worried about it. You're going to be, physically drained as well. We're not able to let go. We're not able to let God work His part because we're just so manipulative and controlling of the situation. Despite our best efforts, humans don't have control over time, right? There's been Time machines, people talk about time. Time is just absolutely relentless. I mean, it just goes, and there's nothing that we can do as humans to change it, and it marches on, and it's just a fact of life. And chance is unpredictable, right? We don't know what's going to happen in the future. Stronger people may be defeated. There's plenty of examples in the Bible where the irony of a strong person being defeated. You think of an example? What was that? David and Goliath? Yeah, that's a great example. Right? If you looked at that, you were a betting person, you'd say, "Well, I'm putting my money on Goliath." Right? He's this big-looking dude with. But God intervened, and the ironic part about David's overcoming. What about the 300? The army, Gideon's army of 300, right? They shrunk down to 300, and they're facing hundreds of thousands of Midianites. I think it was 150,000, something like that. A large number of Midianites, and again, it didn't look like a very fair thing. But God has this ironic thing where the weak win, or what appears to be the weak live. The theme of the victorious underdog is prevalent in the Scriptures. In some ways, Christ can be look like that, right? Because if you think about the Israelites, they were looking for a king. Were they looking physically for somebody like Jesus Christ? No, they were looking for somebody with a lot of pomp and circumstance and power, and somebody that looks like a king, that looks like David or looks like Solomon, and that's not what they got, right? They got this kind of an underdog-looking guy, just a regular guy with extreme power, but he didn't put on the persona of somebody who was going to be very powerful. So I think in some ways Christ fulfills that role as well as somebody who was it looked like a little bit of an underdog, especially if you compared him to the likes of Rome and the power of the world at that time. He didn't seem like a power that was going to arise and defeat Rome. So anyway, so the wise may starve. Human wisdom does not guarantee worldly prosperity. That's a big part of the lie of the prosperity gospel. Now, despite how closely we follow God and how strong we are as a Christian, we may suffer physically. And I go back to Paul again, right? He certainly was not wealthy by that day's standard. Jesus Christ was not wealthy by the world's standards. And so there's really no connection to that. And so a wise person is not necessarily the most materialistic or wealthy person in the room. The world may create circumstances that enable or enforce poverty. The ablest person may be poor. Wealth and prosperity do not equate to wisdom. This is Ecclesiastes 9, 13, and 16. I've also seen this example of wisdom under the sun, and it seemed great to me. There is a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. There was found a poor wise man, and by his wisdom he delivered the city. We read this earlier. Again, the poor wise man is the one who delivered the city. So you never know who you've got, right? We need to measure things by God's standards and not by the world's standards. So the only way to take refuge from these things of time and chance is with God, right? What does time mean to God? Does it mean the same as us? No, it's not. It's not, and that's one of the things when I think about heaven is not being bound by time. I just think that's an interesting concept. It would be so different for us because we're so burdened or saddled with the idea of time. It directs it directs our day. It directs everything that we do when you really, really think about it. So I'm actually looking forward to that, thinking about that and being in that kind of an environment. Okay, unclenching our clenched and clenching our tight fist. I wrote a paper one time about that. Just, when you're clenching your fist, you're trying to hang on to something. And we're trying to hang on, and we're trying to manage our way through something, and we're going to take care of this. I'm the leader of my family and I will make sure this happens, or I'm the leader of this group at church, or I'm a leader of this thing at work. I am going to make sure this happens. And we think about, well, why do we make that kind of stand? I think a lot of it is that we want credit for the success, right? I got us through this. Look at me. I'm just an incredible person that I got us through this almost single-handedly. Isn't that impressive? So that becomes a bit of an ego thing with us. Again, we're relying on human wisdom. We're constantly struggling with fixing things ourselves. And then, so what ends up being the result of this? If we don't ever let God or turn things over to God, what kind of life are we leading? A godless life? Is it very healthy? No, it's not. You're gonna take years off your life fighting all these things. Trying to control things that you can't control, that you don't have control over, is just flat out depressing. And it's hard to, what I struggle with, I always think, well, I read about this and I know God's told me not to worry about this because I can't do anything about it. And I start thinking, or is that really true? I start thinking about, well, what if I tried this? Have I tried that? Have I tried that? It ends up in this circular thing. And learning when to let go for me that's my toughest thing. So as a manager or a leader of a group of people, you ever been in a group where your boss micromanaged you? Or in a situation where your boss, how'd that feel? You excited about that? Have you ever been a leader or a boss that micromanaged people? And I did that for a while until I realized that was a quick way to not be a manager anymore. No one likes to be micromanaged, right? You want to be given a task, parameters, and go and tell me when you're done. And so, that's part of letting things go, is knowing that we can trust others, we give them the task, and we let them do it. Now, if things go wrong, that was a whole other thing. Even if the wheels came off, if you worked in my area, you were going to get micromanaged because I had to answer to what was going on. But as long as things were going okay, just let your people go, let them empower them, and support them. And it's more that servant leadership thing that we've talked about in the past. Wisdom in Christ. 1 Corinthians 1:17-18, for Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, and not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God. In this verse, Paul is dealing with the Greeks. Did the Greeks think they were wise? I mean, in general, right? They did. They had a lot of philosophy, a lot of words that told you how to live, a lot of snappy ideas and way to live, and we still are influenced by that today, believe it or not. So it was a powerful time for philosophy. But this is what Paul is dealing with: this Greek philosophy based on wise human sayings. But much of the human wisdom we encounter today is actually similar to Greek philosophy. If you look at self-help books, you could almost just read Greek philosophy and save yourself a lot of time. But Paul tells us Christians are different. We're focused on the gospel, right? Not just platitudes or one-liners to help you get through something. We're focused on the gospel. We don't just deliver eloquent words of wisdom, although we certainly find them in the parables, in the New Testament, and throughout the Bible. But that's not the total focus for Christians is the cross and Christ dying on the cross. That's the big deal. That's the big deal, not some wise, snappy saying, although you get those, but it's all about Christ and the cross. It's what separates Christianity from, I think, other religions of the world. You've heard Confucius says, this idea, these ancient Chinese religions, it's full of sayings like that as well. When you talk about Christianity, you talk about Christ, we're going to talk about the church. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. I thought I'd have more time than this, but we'll see what happens here. What are the benefits and flaws of self-help pop psychology books? Any benefits of flaws?
Benefit is the person's actually been through that situation and you haven't.
Okay.
From their experience.
Maybe that person's been through a situation and you can learn from their experience. Yes.
I think many times the self-help books tell us to rely on ourselves, and as Christians we know that we can't rely on ourselves. We're going to fall on ourselves.
Right. Hence the title of them is self-help books, right? To help yourself. And there's nothing wrong with helping yourself, but relying on yourself and not relying on God is certainly flawed. Anything else on that question? Do you find any parallels between the benefits of wisdom presented by the preacher or Ecclesiastes and pop psychology? In other words, do you see Ecclesiastes sometime in pop psychology? I think you do, right? Ecclesiastes is full of wisdom, right? And I think a lot of it is mirrored and copied in a lot of the books that we see today. What is the inherent weakness of human wisdom? It's limited, okay? Why is it limited?
Because we are the creation, not the creator.
Exactly. We're limited by our own capabilities, by our own knowledge. We're not tapped into God. So that's a good response. How have you benefited from human wisdom? I think we talked about that a little bit, right? It's always good to learn from somebody who has done something before us. What about human wisdom and common sense? Are those the same thing? Maybe, I don't know. Common sense is hard to define sometimes, but you know it when you see it, right? I think there's an overlap there. There's a certain amount of overlap there.
There's a third element too, and that's experience.
Okay, experience. That's right. Somebody that has done something and lived through something. And we are remiss if we don't take advantage of that information when we're faced with something. Let's go on to number 4. What are some common ironies going against human wisdom? That's kind of a weird question. Can you think of other examples found in the Bible and in the world? No, I'm not going to do that. How is life a snare or a net? How do you plan for the unexpected things in life? And so we're given this life, and I talked a little bit about being aware. Wisdom is somebody who can look out for the future and see things that are happening. Is that something important for us to do? I mean, as a leader of a family or a group of people, should I be thinking about what could happen or the future, or should I look out for snares and traps? Yes?
I think we need to be able to, the what ifs in life, understand how to respond rather than react.
Okay.
Understand these things can happen. It is something like something comes out of the blue. You don't react, you just make a bad decision. You respond, you understand this is what I thought I would do.
Right. I agree with that. I think this all needs to be taken with a spiritual angle to it and how we approach it from God. We can't. I read about these people that are prepping for the end of the world, and I don't want to offend anybody, but and they buy all this food and they dig all these holes, and they're they're trying to get ready for I don't know what. But to me, they put their faith in physical things, right? And so where's that boundary between some level of preparation and going off the edge, right? I think we have to do things within a reasonable amount. And leaders of the church, what about elders? Should they be thinking about what ifs and what could happen and praying about it? And is the spiritual element of that more important than the physical? Yeah, I think it's important for elders to think about what ifs from a spiritual perspective, right? We want to keep our church in a place that we think aligns with God, and so we're going to think about what ifs, what's going on in the world, what could happen here, what could lead us astray, what's being taught in our classes, what's happening. We try to keep things sound and focused on the Scripture way to do things, and so it's certainly important to do that. Yes. Uh-huh. Right.